So this is it's a response to Thought's line from Spencer Cornelia, because there was a Thought's line videos called like "Landlords are bad, okay" or something like that. And he said, he said landlords are evil, and this guy is a landlord, the Spencer Cornelia folk. So let's see what he has to say to defend his business practices from the evils of anti-landlord sentiment. Let's go. If I find the right tab, there we go. And we'll say speed 1.25, that's what we want.
The fake guru videos are awesome and entertaining, but today we'll analyze a growing belief system that being a landlord is bad. Since some of you who follow me are also looking to get into real estate investing, I don't want you to become this guy, basically.
I don't think all landlords are bad people. Like I said about cops, it does not matter to me if an individual landlord is a good person who will go to heaven. The institution that they take part in by being a landlord is what I take issue with specifically.
I really like that this guy sticks to critiquing an idea, not the people. The premise of his disdain for landlords is that he believes they are all participating in rent-seeking behavior. Rent-seeking is an economic concept that occurs when an entity seeks to gain added wealth without any reciprocal contribution of productivity. Typically, it revolves around government-funded social services and social service programs.
I wonder where he's getting this definition from. Rent seeking is when the government does stuff. It's not when, people rent out property and then do not create any additional productivity from it. All they're doing is having an asset and making more money from the asset. That is rent seeking. They're not creating any additional commodities. They're not, keeping the economy going. They're just taking money for an existing piece of capital. Yes, absolutely, 100%. Big government with regards to housing based.
Often people will say that rent seeking is justified because the landlord does their part by paying for the mortgage and paying for repairs, which is not true.
The reason why his argument's foundation is shaky is that being a landlord isn't rent-seeking behavior. They are providing a service to society. If a landlord just...
It's literally, you are seeking rent. It's called renting a flat, renting a house. Why do you think they use the word fucking rent? It's crazy. Like, they're not performing a public service. Like, that service could be done by someone who isn't rent-seeking. You could just have people living in these houses, because the houses are there, right? As long as the builder gets paid for the actual labour that they've engaged with, because obviously labour creates all wealth. All wealth can be tied back to labour initially. As long as they get remunerated for the labour that they engage in, you don't have to pay somebody to, inhabit the property. For example, if you're a landlord and you are somebody who does repairs, who, takes care of the property, that part of it, that's called property management. That's where you take care of what goes wrong with the instances of the property, etc., etc. If somebody wants to pay somebody to take care of the things for them in the house that they live in, that's fine. But paying somebody to exist in an asset without actually, generating any economic productivity on top of that is what is bad, and that's what landlords do engage in.
So happened to be a public official that could change a small policy such that he was able to force his tenants to pay extra rent that would be pure profit in his pocket, then that would be rent seeking.
Tenants pay for both of those things because the money that the landlord uses to pay for those things was collected from their tenants. The landlord is not paying for jack. They're spending their tenants' money.
I'm not sure if many of you are aware, but there's a growing group of people on social media that are in full belief that there shouldn't be a cost to live or that everyone should be able to own their home. I don't know.
Yeah, based 100%.
Exactly what their end goal is, but they all seem to hate landlords. I'm curious if these same people go to restaurants and demand that their food is free because it's unfair that the cost of producing the food, the staff, the building, the insurance, among other expenses are paid for by the customer.
So when you go to a restaurant, someone has to cook the food, someone has to grow the food, someone has to serve the food, someone has to upkeep the building, someone has to manage those people. These people are engaging in labor. They are expending their own effort and labor to be able to create the product, to take it from the constituent parts of this particular commodity and then put it in front of you on the plate so that you get served, and engage in these services and or commodity production. What does a landlord do? Nothing. They own a thing and then they charge you money because they own the thing that you need, right? Now, I understand. You may say, well, no justice. Hang on a minute. There are plenty of things that people need to have, yet people charge money for. I'm like, well, first of all, labor goes into producing these things, like, for example, food and clothes, etc., etc. But also, when you have a look at the economies of these things and the scale of the economies, right? When you look at something like, I don't know, what happens with regards to plentiful food, these are elastic markets in which as soon as demand increases, supply can increase. Unfortunately, the market for housing is very much inelastic in supply, because having to build additional houses obviously takes a lot of startup capital, which has to be invested somewhere, usually by the government, at least specifically in the past in the UK was, for much of the post-war period, it was done by local government investment. into additional council houses in these instances. But also, it just takes a long time for the market supply to meet the demand. And when you leave it all up to the private sector, the people who own and rent out these properties, if you increase the supply, that reduces the price of the end product, so the rents would go down. So why would they invest money into making their rental prices go down? It doesn't make any sense. So the only way in which you can engender a large amount of additional supply of housing is through public policy, and that's been shown time and time again. The only time there's ever been a bigger boom in housing was when local authorities did so in the post-war period, especially, I mean, at least in the UK, for example. And that's why, you know, rents are lower in the UK than they are in America, because, you know, our supply was at least curated at some point by local authorities.
People need a place to live, all of the time. It is a physiological need. It is at the bottom of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
This very leftist viewpoint on housing centers around the idea that housing should be a fundamental right and that everyone should have access to housing for free, I guess. I think they believe that they're owed housing because they're alive. It's a right, not a privilege in their eyes. Reproduction is also at the same level, and I would hope that they don't believe that they are owed reproductive opportunities with a lovely lady because it's a human need. That's basically what they're saying with housing.
There should not ever be homeless people.
I mean, the issue with landlordism isn't such that, you know, because I mean, the problem is that the market is shaped such that there is no alternative, especially not in the US, to engaging in private rental, right? It's different in the UK, where at least it was different pre-neoliberal reforms of Margaret Thatcher, where if you didn't have a place to live, you'd be put into a council house, right? Now that that's changed, and these have all been sold off through to right to buy, and in 2011, the people in private rentals outstrip people in public rentals for the first time, right? Whereas if you have this choice, not only this drives rents down, but it also disincentivizes people engaging in the rate-seeking behavior of being a landlord and being in property speculation. Because again, these people aren't doing it because they want to create a public good for people overall. All they actually want to do is make money off people, and the people who they're going to make money off by being landlords, by artificially increasing the price of housing, by engaging in the creation of artificial scarcity. The people who they're going to be able to take money off are the poorest in society. The people whom they are now pricing out of housing because of the level of property speculation that they're engaging in, which makes the market for housing higher. If you look at the graphs in the UK, as soon as council housing has been sold off and local authorities weren't building more housing, house prices skyrocketed. It's not rocket science, right? Whereas if, for example, people only owned the one house that they live in, with the existing supply of housing that we have, the prices would go down, and everyone would be able to afford the houses, especially if the government were able to use public policy to be able to control public housing as an entry point for people who couldn't afford a mortgage at the time, or people who were poor, or people who were unemployed, etc., etc.
Particularly when there are more homes than people. The idea that we should pay to be housed, or to have any of our basic human needs met, without which we will almost certainly die, is unfathomably cruel.
Again, he completely negates the fact that food isn't free, and you'll die faster without food than you will without shelter.
Yeah, but people have to engage in labor to get you food. People don't have to engage in labor just to own a house. Simple. Like, people who work should be remunerated for said work. I mean, I'm not an anarchist, so I'm not going to engage in his, like, full-on, like, end-stage anarchist philosophy. But the base kind of sentiment that he's coming forward here was just that, you know, unless you're being remunerated for work that you're doing, charging for it just to make for someone to be allowed to exist is cruel, and I agree with Thought Simon on that issue.
To the people who have this mindset, they're right. In their minds, their worldview is the correct one. In life, we are all characters within an economic system that was not our choice. You can either choose to be like this, where you complain about housing or spend time theorizing about why housing should be something it isn't, or you could
Or we could change the system and make it better. That's what Thought Slime's advocating for. Do you think he just made this video? Oh, sorry, they say this video? So I'm sorry, Thought Slime, I've misgendered you in this video. Do you think they are saying in this video, they're saying that, oh, landlords are bad and that's just it, right? Fuck landlords, these people are bad people. We're morally impugning them for what they're doing. Rather than saying, okay, this system incentivizes this poor behavior that is immoral from landlords and incentivizes people to engage in this rent-seeking, profit-seeking behavior. Whereas, if you take that opinion and say, well, that means we should change the system, and that's what this is. This is an agitprop, right? I understand this is YouTube content. I understand a lot of it's just going to be people engage with on kind of just to be able to imbibe content. But at the end of the day, what they are trying to do is push this content to people and change people's opinions on society so that we change the economic system. This guy's clearly on the capitalist realism, saying, well, housing's always going to be a commodity, so unless you engage with a commodity, then you're just wrong. And I was like, well, no, we should decommodify it. That's what we should do.
spend time learning how to operate within the system to help you live the life you want. This is why I teach the concepts of house hacking. It allows for the easiest entry point into real estate investing while earning rental income and reducing housing costs.
By an economic system that prioritizes someone's right to make a meager profit on Airbnb over the lives of its most vulnerable people. Every hotel with an empty room has killed that person for the price of about $137 a night. That's all a human life is worth.
He makes so many logical leaps, it's hilarious. Empty hotel rooms are the cause for homelessness.
I agree with ThoughtSlime's point here, but to clip this particular one out of context, or just clip this particular one out of the actual video itself rather than engaging with the overall point about, economic productivity that's not engaged with regard to landlordism and the way the market dynamics they're engaged with regards to a society that incentivizes landlordism. That's like the general point of the video, rather than just this kind of oblique point about how we should treat humans within society or whatever.
Apparently, homelessness isn't a solvable problem, which is why it still exists, and just giving people free shelter is a recipe for disaster. I'm curious who he thinks pays for electricity, maintenance, insurance, the water bill, and the cleaning ladies in a hotel. Unfortunately, this line of thinking is from people who have never run a business before because they don't understand risk and having to foot the bill when someone screws you.
Homelessness could not...
I would assume ThoughtSlime is of the opinion that if someone was living in a hotel because they're homeless and they can't afford to, they wouldn't have their room cleaned by the people whose labor would end up having to be remunerated. Like, the idea that I think if there's an empty room there and someone's going to live in them for free, they should probably clean it themselves, right? I don't know why you think a communist is advocating for, corporate ownership of housing. Very strange.
Exist without landlords. Homelessness could not exist if we as a society just stopped treating homes as something it was permissible to profit from the ownership or sale of.
There are many factors that lead to homelessness that have absolutely nothing to do with housing.
It's not new age communism. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Communist is a class of stateless, moneyless society. Nothing to do with everything being owned by corporations.
Costs. The reason why rent is continually increasing is because the supply isn't matching the demand. One way to help is by buying a house with multiple bedrooms and converting your house into a rent by room model, which is what I implement.
Fuck off. Alright, so this is the HMO guy where he's literally just a cunt. Like, fuck this guy. Like, that could be a single family home. Or multiple, that could be a family home that then you're just cutting up and then trying to rent back at extortionate prices to people who now can't afford to get on the property ladder and can't afford to be parents because the wages are so shit. It drives me up the wall, these people. They just they can't see the wood for the trees. Okay, if you're gonna say corporate government, then you're just stupid. You're just silly. It's just too capitalist freedom, too consumed by capitalist realism.
Within about 90 days, I should be at about 22 tenants from 4 properties. Yes, in 4 houses, I will be able to provide more than 20 rooms to the supply of affordable rentals. I charge less than market rate, and I never increase rent. And I make plenty of money. Both sides can benefit.
In cases like this...
No, what you are benefiting because you are making profit, and they are paying to exist whilst you provide no economic benefit to society. Oh god, it drives me around the bend, these people. They can't even focus the idea that the idea here is to change fundamental aspects of the economic model rather than just complain about the one that as it exists, right?
I firmly believe that these homes should be seized and zero compensation should be given to the previous owners. Zilch. You tried to profit from making the price of living in our community skyrocket. You deserve to lose that investment. You deserve to go broke. You scumbags.
It's interesting you're saying, well, supply isn't increasing the demand. I'm like, well, what's artificially decreasing the supply of affordable properties? Might it be the people owning more properties than they need, that they have the use value for? Or is everything this kind of liberal brain rot where everything is just measured by exchange value, where there is no intrinsic use value to commodities?
I try not to clown on guys like this because this is simply just a lack of experience and understanding with how investing works. Buying real estate has a lot of risks and a lot of effort goes into maintaining property and managing rentals. The reward is equity and appreciation. A couple years ago, I attempted...
Why should you gain equity and appreciation for something that you don't even live in? When all you're doing by buying up more property than you need is making that is decreasing the supply artificially. That's where your money comes from, by constraining the supply rather than, you're not creating supply for people by being a landlord.
to flip houses, lost around
Tony
$120,000
Blair's a fucking liberal. The fucking centrist liberal. No one on the left likes Tony Blair.
total in real estate. I'm opening up my books to show you what a rental property with a lot of expenditure looks like. I've received $49,355 of income for the year 2021, but I'm negative $58,056 for the year. I don't say loss because the hope is that the money will be recouped over time, which is the definition of investing. This property has required over
just fucking sell them to people who are actually going to live in them.
for $81,000 in maintenance and capital expenditures this year alone. That's cash money out of my pocket, no loan. The money I've spent just on upgrading this house and maintaining the quality to ensure tenant satisfaction is more than half of the median household income here in Las Vegas. I've spent almost $110,000 of cash this year owning the house. This is what investing actually looks like. I've dealt with a tenant lighting my house on fire, a $30,000 sewage problem, renovations, upgrades, faulty contractor work, a contractor running off with my money, you name it, I've dealt with it. You get the upsides because every property has inherent downside risk that isn't seen until it shows its ugly head. This guy is probably...
If you don't want it, like, if the risk is so bad, why do people engage in landlordism? If well, there's going to be some equity somewhere down the line. Well, okay. Well, then clearly you're explaining here that that there is a net positive to engaging in this rent-seeking landlord behavior, which, you know, you say, oh, there might be some risks here, and I'm like, well, whatever. Like, you clearly, you and plenty of the slews of landlords who own plenty more properties than they actually have the intrinsic human use value for. These people will somehow agree that the risk is worth it. I wonder why the risk might be worth it. Is it because it's an incredibly lucrative market? I wonder.
Probably an awesome tenant, so he's upset that he isn't making money while the landlords are, but I can guarantee that if he went into property management, he'll understand what can go wrong.
But it's one thing to complain about the big mega...
Property management, landlordism are different things. Like, again, Portsheim here isn't impugning the idea of property management, the idea of being paid a wage, for example, or being paid remuneration for engaging the labour of maintaining properties. But you wonder why it is that a bunch of people who own houses, like who own their own house, like I do, don't hire a property manager. They do it all themselves. Like saying, well, that's the labour I engage in as a landlord. I'm like, well, no, that's like, you're just tacking property management onto the vast majority of your money that is made from the asset that you own. And you got to remember, like, the balance sheet that he was looking at, saying, well, I made a net loss over this amount of time, both off maintenance and then minus rentals, but you're still retaining all of the assets. If he then sold all the houses, he'd still be in positive equity at this point, because he actually has the asset at the end of the day. The person who is renting from the landlord has nothing. All they do is spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, hundreds or thousands of dollars or pounds a month or whatever, and then that gets pissed away. That just gets put in someone else's pocket for an asset that the landlord owns and the tenant does not. Whereas, for example, I pay £200 a month on my mortgage. I will eventually own this house and have an asset at the end of it, which means all this money that I've spent is then accrued into something that I own, rather than just frittered away into nothingness.
Corporations that are most of the landlords, it's quite another to complain about Joe, Jane, or Gene Schmo. Regular folk who rent out a little bit on the side to make ends meet. And while people like that may be less contemptible on the surface, they're no less exploitative. They are, as a class of people, holding you hostage.
He uses really powerful language to manipulate you into thinking he's making good points. Investors account for 1/5 of all home purchases in Canada, adding more fuel to the debate about their influence on the country's soaring real estate prices and demand for housing. This guy lives in Toronto, I believe, which is why he probably sees housing as being unaffordable and owned by large corporations. The data says that a majority of homes are still owner-occupied, and out of the 20% of homes purchased by investors, how many are mega corporations, as he puts it?
I mean, that's the whole point that Pforzheim was making, that it doesn't matter whether it's mega investors or whether it's, you know, people who have a couple of extra properties on the side or whatever. Like, they specifically said that that's not the point they were making. Like, Spencer's completely clipped this particular point out of context to try and make it look like a different point's being made. The actual point being made here, it doesn't matter whether it's a large corporation or whether it's a small-time investor. These people are still engaging in rent-seeking, which is still bad for both the economy and for poor people in general, and for the working class. Like, that's the point that Pforzheim was making that's been kept completely out of context. And it doesn't, like, it's still being shown over time that this increasing accrual of rental property and additional investment property is still spiking house prices. It doesn't matter what kind of percentage of the market, as long as it prices people out of being able to be owner-occupier, which is happening more and more as people over time, as younger generations are buying houses older and older because it becomes increasingly more unaffordable. House prices this week just hit an all-time high in the UK in history, right? Since records began. It says something. when wages haven't been increasing with productivity, etc., etc. So it's becoming increasingly more affordable to own a home. And if you can't afford your own home because supply is increasing with regards to the demand, because the supply is artificially constrained by people who are using it as investment rather than to use it for its actual use value, which is somewhere for people to actually live in, that means that more people are going to get forced to have to rent from a landlord rather than be able to buy their own house, which means more money gets shoveled into the pockets of property investors who then reinvest it in more property, further constraining the supply. It's parasitic.
Probably a small amount. My opinion, I think housing will never be this affordable again. If you're struggling to own a house now, I have a feeling that it will only get worse, which is why I think you're seeing a
That's your fault. It's your fault for artificially constraining the supply, Spencer. You did this. You helped do this.
Growing trend of people hating on landlords. They see landlords as the reason for housing being unaffordable. 7 months ago, I released a video detailing every step someone can take to reach $100,000 net worth and begin owning real estate within 5 years. It was a well-received video, and you should check it out if you want
to own multiple real estate properties. I don't want to own multiple properties. I want to own my one house that I live in because I don't want to engage in the immoral action of landlordism by profiteering off of a need for someone else's need for housing that then makes it harder for people to get on the housing ladder themselves. I'm sorry, like, this is you're saying, well, like, I want to be rich, so I'm going to be engaging something in immoral. That's not refuting the point that ThoughtSlime's even making.
to see a step-by-step game plan for making it happen.
When was the last time a landlord did a credit check on you? When was the last time
It wasn't even a refutation. What's Spencer even saying here?
you did a credit check on a landlord? When was the last time you had the time or ability to investigate a landlord's financial reliability? To ask for references from them.
I legitimately love the point he makes here and wish it was a commonality. I think renters should have the ability to demand proof that the landlord can afford necessary maintenance and repairs. As much as I love real estate investing, I will wholeheartedly admit that there are awful slumlords out there who will withhold maintenance requests and necessary upgrades, all to pad the bottom line and neglect the tenant's well-being. In a perfect market, the renters renting properties from those landlords would move to a property being managed by a better.
I wonder why it's not a perfect market. I wonder why there's been market failure in this area. I can't possibly understand the reason why. There's been this weird market failure with regards to housing that allows people to get away with this reprehensible behaviour. It's so difficult to pinpoint, Spencer. I absolutely wonder.
Better landlord so that the bad landlord practices would be wiped out from the marketplace, but that isn't the case.
What is a lease?
Yes, it isn't the case. Do you want to explain why, Spencer? Do you want to elucidate on that point, or just want to make a descriptive statement, right? Do you just want to continue being descriptive? Or, it just happens to be the way it is. I don't know why that happened. Possibly. No, couldn't possibly explain it.
If not a contract that you sign under threat of being tossed out onto the street.
Yeah, the World Economic Forum are fucking neoliberal capitalist corporate ghouls who want to essentially reprogram the economy to be able to make capitalism continue, right? They understand the growing resentment of neoliberalism and they want to be able to pad that moving forward. Like they're just more capitalists. They paid off Johnny Harris to do this video about fucking stakeholder capitalism, saying, "Oh, Dad, capitalism can save the world. It's not going to cause complete destruction of the economy and of the world ecology, right? Etc. etc." It's all just like capitalist marketing. It's not like some big fucking cabal of people trying to make you poor. I mean, it is like through incentive structures. It's not like they're not like deliberately trying to make you poor, but they're just trying to continue They want to grease the wheels of capitalism so it doesn't collapse in on itself due to its own inherent incongruities.
Is extortion.
After making a great point, he then jumps to an extreme example. Landlords are providing use of their property for a small fee. What guys like this don't seem to understand.
Small fee. I wonder if any of the renters that he rents to would agree that think that the rent they have to pay is small. I wonder. I mean, I am no tanky, but rentals in the Soviet Union were 5% of people's income, rather than the aim for 33%, which isn't even met in the US right now.
Is there's typically a huge cash outlay in order to buy property. Tenants don't have to put a down payment on the house and tie up large amounts of cash in an illiquid asset. They take on nearly no risk, and all maintenance problems should be paid by the landlord. I add the should.
Well, they do take on risk. You take risk by being a renter because at literally any point your landlord can go, "I'm selling up. You have to leave." You are completely at their whims with what they want to do with the property. Like there is you're missing like one of the biggest part of like tenant risk, and also risking having to rent from a from a slumlord that he rightly decries earlier in the video. And again, you as you quite rightly point out as well, you can't do credit checks on landlords, you can't do background checks on them. So there's that inherent risk to being a renter in these situations, right? Like, he just didn't. It's crazy that he managed to point this out earlier and then completely move away from it when he's making this point here. And he said, "Oh, some people just can't afford a down payment on a house anymore. Oh, I don't know why. I don't know what's possibly caused that. I don't know. Who could possibly understand where that might have come from? And you actually need to move all your shit, etc., etc."
Should, but really tenants have leverage if the property becomes inhabitable. Because tenants take on nearly no risk, they face
Yes, yes, Dolov. Corporations want to continue capitalism in such a way that it disenfranchises the working class. We've always known that. Communists have known that for centuries. Like, come on, we know that corporations, as well as plenty of other capitalist entities, want to perpetuate an economic system that exploits the working class. That's literally our worldview. Keep up.
eviction if they do not pay for use of the property. An experiment I'd love to try is seeing a guy like this let someone borrow his car for a week and have them not give it back. We'll see how he reacts. Even better is if the borrow damages the vehicle.
In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen...
If you're not charging to borrow the vehicle, that's the issue, right? And especially when, cars have the actual automobile supply. A, it's not a fundamental human right. And B, the supply of cars is elastic with demand. Most people who want them have access to be able to own one, even if it's a cheap one, right? Whereas with housing, it is gate kept behind landlordism in the same way that kind of car rental companies are not.
Quick action on deferring mortgages for homeowners by large banks. In Toronto, major banks have granted up to 8 months deferral on mortgage payments. No such equivalent relief has been offered to renters, who must make do with a temporary freeze on evictions.
On the surface, it seems unfair that landlords could have received mortgage assistance or a freeze, but tenants were still required to pay rent. That's because the debt still stays under the landlord's name, the utilities were still being used by renters, and there's no leverage if the tenant just moves out. If all renters were responsible...
To be fair, I don't know what it's like in Canada or what it's like wherever Spencer Cornelia lives, but most of the time in the UK, your utilities are not included in your rent. You have to pay them out of pocket as well, right? And again, I'm not sure what this is like in Toronto. Yeah, you're just engaging in JQ shit, Joe Love. Unfortunately, I enjoyed debating with you, but if you're just gonna post JQ shit, then yeah, you have to get out. Sorry. But yeah, like, you have to pay for your utilities as well. Like, the rent is something you pay on top of that just because you have the privilege of paying off somebody else's mortgage for them because they happen to be richer than you when they can afford the down payment. That's just the difference, right? Like, someone starts off the capital for the down payment and you didn't, therefore you have to buy their mortgage off them. Simple. Like, that's what renting is.
And could verify that they'd have the lump sum of owed rent when the freeze was over, then it would be fine to allow renters to not pay, but that's not the case. Leases or contracts, they are a mutual agreement where...
If the mortgage is being frozen, then all the expenses is just... That's been negated on the landlord's end as well. Like, as soon as the mortgage payments then go up again, and then the renters can keep paying that, even in this garbage, like, liberal capitalist system that we exist in at the moment, right? That's still something they're going to have to... That's still something these can both be frozen. Maybe even in this particular situation, right, the compromise would be that you'd only pay for the utility bills that have been paid out, and you don't have to cover the mortgage, even in this shitty situation where renters have to pay for somebody else's mortgage for them. That's the problem, is that so many times when people try and critique anti-capitalism, they just only look through it from the frame of what exists currently rather than the frame of what could exist moving forward. It's very frustrating. They can't even engage with, the societal change that people on the left want to see.
Whereby a renter can have full access to the property for a small monthly fee.
Because you're charging people to live in their home. Because you bought a home so that you could charge people money. That's the reason. It's the only reason. But if you want to stop paying those mortgage payments and water bills, I actually have a suggestion, and try this. It's a real simple trick you can use. Sell the home.
What's ironic about this thought process is that landlords selling their property during the pandemic to owner-occupied buyers would diminish the supply pool for renters. This would lead...
No, because it wouldn't, because the person who would buy the owner-occupied house would either previously be a renter or be other owner-occupier who would then free up another property. Like, it's one in, one out. Like, if the supply is fixed, the demand is one in, one out. That's not decreasing the supply for renters because there's one less renter or another property that's opened up from a previous owner occupier. Yeah, exactly. And because interest rates are so low, it's much easier to get onto the property ladder as someone with capital invest, and is incentivized by the low interest rates as well. People are incentivized to engage in buy-to-let property, and there are plenty of mortgages which will only sell their property to people looking to buy-to-let. It's toxic, and it's parasitic, as I said before.
To increase rent prices. You see this in some markets in the United States where supply is constricted by government intervention. The goal should be to increase the supply of affordable rentals, which is why I'm in favor of any measure that allows for putting as many people as possible on a single lot of land. House hacking is one way, reducing friction with additional housing units is another.
Yes, good thing. Yeah, good additional housing is a good thing. Well, first of all, obviously, this is all in defense of his point that people selling their homes would decrease the demand, which again, it would decrease the supply. It decreased the supply, but also decreased the demand by the exact amount. So it doesn't change the graph on that regard, the supply demand curve within that regard, right? But he's right. We should increase the supply, and we should do this using public housing. Simple as that. Like, you should use public housing to undercut private rentals, like we used to do for generations until Thatcher ruined everything. And then New Labour refused to fix the problem. Exactly. I mean, to be fair, I think it is good that a small amount of inflation it incentivizes people to spend rather than save money, which increases the velocity of the economy, right? Increases overall expenditure and encourage people to invest in purchasing commodities to be able to drive the economy. In capitalism, I get that's good. The problem is where you also have like interest rates structured and mortgages structured and a housing market structured specifically to encourage people to invest in additional properties. That's the issue. That's the big issue, specifically with regard to this particular market.
Allowing for single families to become duplexes or triplexes is another.
Do you see the problem that you have? The problem of having to pay the bills in this home that you don't live in only exists because you bought a home to charge people to live in? Like, if you didn't own it, if you didn't own a second home specifically to make money from people, someone else would pay for it, someone who lived there. You see that?
As much as I disagree with the line of thinking this group shares, I can't say they're wrong. If their belief systems are right in their head, then landlords are evil rent seekers who should be forced to sell their homes. If you want to learn how to actually own real estate, then spend time studying people doing it. Everyone watching this video can afford real estate within the next 5 years. It just depends on what content you consume.
Yeah, I do want to. I could own real estate if I wanted to, but unfortunately, I'm not a bell end, so I don't want to do so. If everyone just stopped doing it, the market would naturally tend towards more people being able to own their own homes rather than a small amount of people owning lots of homes. Right? Simple. It's not rocket science on market dynamics. Well, that was incredibly infuriating to watch that one there, but hey ho. Turns out capitalist simps are always going to be capitalist simps, especially not if they are trying to essentially post hoc justify the immoral behavior that they're engaging in by saying, well, these commodities have exchange value and I gain more personal marginal value from having all these excess properties. Doesn't matter about the wider societal effects of what this happens to the working class because I've been incentivized to put in this position. And that's true. Like, he has been incentivized to put in this position. We live in a society that commodifies this specifically, and as I've said, through public policy, has incentivized people in engaging in speculative investment of property. But unfortunately, that is really good for the haves, not particularly great for the have-nots, and why I fundamentally agree in a large public housing sector, which, again, we used to have in the UK for ages. For all the seppos watching, like, in the post-war period. Let me just bring up the graph that I found before. House building UK graph. There we go. If you have a look at this particular image right here. If you look here, this is the post-war period up until this kind of period here, where when it starts dropping off here. The 80s, I wonder who came into power in the 80s. I wonder who that could have been, where the supply was inflated by a lot of local authorities building housing, especially in the post-war period. It was stratospherically more than the private sector. The government specifically invested because they knew it was a public good, right? They knew the investment would lead to an overall public good, right? They engaged in that because they understood that. And then suddenly the neoliberal thinks, well, the government should just step out, and suddenly all this additional housing is all completely dropped off. And it's not, if you look at the actual house pricing over the time, there's a better graph that actually had the house prices on the graph as well. That's the one. This is the graph I was looking at. Open tab. where you can see here that as soon as we get to this point of inflection where things move over to being private and housing associations rather than through local authorities, suddenly the price skyrockets. Again, correlation, not causation. Like, I can understand, you want to be wary of someone making a claim based on correlation rather than in causation. But as I think I have explained, due to overall marketization of additional rental properties and the sell-off of the private sector through right to buy, clearly shows why this would also be causative as well. Thank you very much for the follow, Arab Smell. I much appreciate that. It's a wonderful nickname you've got there. So yeah, solution is to build enough council properties to undercut rentals. I understand we're probably not going to get the decommodification of housing right now. What we should do is have a mass building of council housing, as we have seen here, to be able to deal with the demand in high density as well, because we don't want to increase urban sprawl too much, because that is much worse for overall city planning with regards to air pollution and accessibility, and overall efficiency of these areas, right? High density council housing, that would fix this issue, and would specifically undercut rentals and give people the opportunity to choose whether they want to live in public or private housing, would then reduce the price of private rentals, which would make it less lucrative, which means few people would engage in landlordism, which would then mean more people have the opportunity to own their own homes. Brilliant. There you go. Problem solved. Simple as that.